Smart man. Okay. Oh, Andy, you have a
Sir, Dear Father, we just thank you so much for this time in the middle of the week. We ask you to be with us tonight as we study the Word. Lord, we just pray for the ones that are not able to be here. Pray for our family. We ask for comfort for those who are able. Lord, we rejoice in your love and your comfort that you give us in times of need. That you're the only one that has the answers when it seems like there's nothing else we can turn to. Help us to understand that. Help us to grow stronger in faith. Forgive us when we fail you, Lord. In Jesus' name. Amen.
Okay, Doug's got me trained, I think. So, just in case I forget, we're in Acts chapter 8. I'm going to say it right one time. Kandake. Kandake. That's her name. So, if I say it wrong, the rest of class, you can all bear witness, I said it right once. And I'll tell you what I'm talking about in a minute. First, flip back to Isaiah 53. I know, I have a reason. We're in Acts chapter 8. And then go to Isaiah 53. I just kind of want to challenge you to try and put yourself in this mindset. Isaiah 52 closes with, and 53 begins with what's called the third suffering servant song. Now, this was written a little over 700 years before Jesus comes on the scene. So that means that for better than 7 centuries, the Jews have had this text and the other related, as I mentioned, there's at least 3, some scholars say 4. They've had at least these 3 suffering servant songs or servant songs as a part of their holy canon. Well, unless you're talking about the Sadducees who don't believe anything but the first 5 books. But try and imagine what it would sound like when you read these or hear these verses being read with Jesus not at all a part of the equation. What would you conclude? Because Isaiah's writing, we're in the second half of Isaiah. This is predominantly a very positive section, a section of promise. First half deals mostly with the coming judgment and their failures, although it's got positives woven into it. But after the middle of Isaiah, the tone changes and he begins talking about these positive, wonderful promises that God has beyond the coming punishment. So try and imagine, and let's talk about some of the challenges, what this would sound like if you're reading these or you hear these words. Russ, we're in Isaiah 52, starting in verse 13. I'll be back in Acts, I promise, but I have a reason. But just listen to these verses and try and hear them as someone who's never heard of Jesus, because Jesus has not come on the scene yet, okay? Because when we read this, we automatically go, well, that's easy, that's Jesus. For 700 years, they had no easy answer to this. Okay, starting in 52, verse 13. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. Just as many were astonished at you, so his visage was marred more than any man, his form more than the sons of men. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths at him. For what had not been told them, they shall see. What they had not heard, they shall consider. Who has believed our report? To whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, as a root out of dry ground. He has no form or comeliness. When we see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised, rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. We hid, as it were, our faces from him. He was despised. We did not esteem him. Surely he has borne our griefs, carried our sorrows. Yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him. By his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter. As a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. He was taken from prison, from judgment. Who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgressions of my people he was stricken. They made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days. The pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. He shall see the labor of his soul and be satisfied. By his knowledge my righteous servant shall justify many, for he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion unto for the transgressors. Now imagine, for 700 years, when you hear this read in the synagogues, you have no Jesus to fill in the blank. What kind of questions would you bring to the text? For instance, look at the tenses of the tenses of the verbs. When it talks about what all occurs to the servant, what kind of tense is it? Is that future? Is it present tense? Is it past tense? It's all past tense. Isaiah seems to be writing about something that's already happened, that he can see, that he can bear testimony to. So what might the Jewish mind try and figure out? Yes, the nice thing about the English translations, we do appreciate that. You didn't. So what might they wrestle with when they're listening to this text? Okay, good. Then it all shifts past tense, already accomplished, right? Okay?
I'm sure you'd be asking the same thing for these jokes.
Now don't spoil, Doug. He is terrible about taking my thunder. But you're right, that's exactly but that's why I wanted us to wrestle with it some. Who is this person? Because generally, you're either, and that's the reason he's going to ask the question. He could have been writing this about himself as a suffering prophet. Isaiah is not so much the suffering prophet. That would be Jeremiah. When Jeremiah writes it, yeah, he's living it. Boy, front and center. He goes through it all. Isaiah, we don't have a lot of, we've got later church history and tradition about his fate, but it's not recorded in Scripture unless it's referred to in Hebrews chapter 11. But it's never expressly recorded in the Old Testament record. Isaiah's writing, unlike Jeremiah, who writes just before Judah's being carried off into captivity, Isaiah's writing 150 years before Jerusalem will be destroyed. His closest coming disaster is the northern 10 tribes are being ready to carried off into captivity by the Assyrians, and they'll disappear from history. But Isaiah's delivering his message in Judah. He's not even up there in the danger area. And so he's some of the kings he delivers his message under are good kings. They're very pro-God. Not all of them, but a couple of them definitely are. Hezekiah and Uzziah. And so if you were sitting there listening to this prophet deliver this oracle, and then later hearing it read in the synagogues, your first inclination might be, well, he must be talking about himself, but nothing we know about Isaiah fits this. Besides that, if you press what he says about this servant, Isaiah could never have accomplished the things that this servant accomplishes. Now, Another possibility, what do the Old Testament prophets regularly promise in the future?
The Messiah.
Right? Okay. A lot of the passages, even though Isaiah is full of passages that make you scratch your head about how can anybody fulfill that, but a lot of those picture the Messiah as the star rising in the east, and the son of David who's coming back to establish his kingdom, and they do paint him in a very authoritative and triumphant role. This doesn't fit their narrative at all. It's no wonder that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin, and for that matter, most of the Jews apparently, they couldn't wrap their head around a suffering Messiah. Had they read, look at just some of the things he says about it. Let's see. He shall bear their iniquities. Let's see. He was cut off from the land of the living for the transgressions of my people. He was stricken. He was bruised for our iniquities, wounded for our transgressions. Chastisement of our peace was upon him. By his stripes we are healed. You know, these are incredible accomplishments being promised by God of this individual, whoever it is. But for 700 years, apparently, I'm going to say nobody, at least nobody we know of, had a grip on who Isaiah is talking about. It's a 700-year-old secret. So when we get into Acts chapter 8, we spent time last week with Philip in Samaria. Philip suddenly gets directed a different direction. His GPS voice is definitely not female. God tells him, okay? So, back in Acts chapter 8, I just wanted you to get a grasp for where the question arises in this. Devout, well-studied, zealous Jewish scholars and rabbis and the whole works, they would study those passages because they did. They studied Isaiah. They studied Jeremiah. They would study those passages, and they would hit on these servant songs and go, what? And especially this one. It is a huge, glaring 700-year-old secret that nobody had a key to unlock until now. So, Acts chapter 8. Tremendous success in Samaria. God has shown that he has opened the kingdom, and he's going to even include the Samaritans. And I'm sure Peter and John, the rest of the apostles, are going, wow, I didn't see this coming. Well, they'll have bigger surprises, but we're not there yet. Okay. Just finished wrapping it up, verse 25 of Acts chapter 8. When they had testified and preached the word of the Lord. And something else, go through chapter 8, just chapter 8, and see how many different ways it describes the message they're preaching. You've got the word of the Lord. I'm not going to go through all of them right now, but you'll see another one in just a minute. When they testified and preached the word of the Lord, they returned to Jerusalem preaching the gospel. There's two different ways of expressing it in the same verse even. Preaching the gospel in many villages of the Samaritans. Now an angel of the Lord spoke to Philip. His GPS was an angel. Saying, arise, go toward the south along the road which goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza. And I'd love to have Amber's pictures. I think she's got pictures from her trip to Israel of this region. I think that's right. It says, he arose and went. And behold, a man of Ethiopia, a eunuch of great authority under Candace, I got it, the queen of the Ethiopians, who had charge of all her treasury, had come to Jerusalem to worship. So we learned several things about him right now. What kind of person is he? Is he a Jew? Probably not. Probably not. I think he's probably a proselyte, a God-fearer. Maybe he'd taken it as far as circumcision. That was as far, but I find it curious, but I guess it's possible. I won't rule it out, but the text seems to be focused on other groups rather than Jews at this point in the text. So that's kind of where I'm leaning. And he's a high authority, but Daniel was a high authority in Egypt. So yeah, you could argue that, I guess. Yep.
We're about to get to the rest of the world.
This is not generally viewed as the first exposure, and this might support your argument. Acts chapter 10 is generally agreed to be the moment when the doors of the kingdom are open to the Gentiles. So if this is a Gentile, he would be the first. But being a God-fearer, at the very least a proselyte, whether or not he had been fully converted, that may be why he's not viewed as the first Gentile convert, so to speak. But I guess you could argue that both ways. Okay, so we know he's a God-fearer anyway. He's devout because he's been to Jerusalem during the feast time to worship. So he's done pilgrimage. He takes his religion very seriously, and now on the long ride home in the chariot, he's spending time reading not National Geographic, but he's reading Scripture. So that's pretty good. What else do we learn about him besides that he's a high royal official? What's the term he's always known by? Eunuch. How did the eunuch fare in the Old Covenant? What rights, limitations would a eunuch have? You remember? In God's law, okay, go for it.
Approach God and worship
They could not approach God and worship in the temple.
or the temple.
Because they were emasculated. Now, there is a possibility this is just a title that he was given as his role, but the way it's repeated all the way through the story, I don't see it that way, but it is. I've heard it argued that way. It could have been done to him. If you were put in charge of a harem, that's what happened. But the eunuch was not given or granted access to worship God along with all the other males of equal standing. They were very limited. They were shut out. Matter of fact, tell me if I'm right on this, Doug. Even if it was a Levite who was born a eunuch, they couldn't do Levitical duties. They were excluded as well, right? I think I want to say there's a passage that says that. But anyway, so from the get-go, you're trying to worship a God that his old covenant, under which you've been living all this time, says you are not fully welcome. You are not fully accepted. It's not saying that he doesn't love you. It is saying that you've got to keep your distance. It's kind of like a leper. Could a leper approach God in worship, physical worship? No, they were expected to be isolated. They'd still want to worship God, but they had to do it from the back of the bus, to use an old... Yes, ma'am. They probably would have been even outside that. So you've got the Jewish males, you've got the Jews, and then you had the court of the Gentiles. So at the very closest they could have come would have been the court of the Gentiles. And I'm not even sure about that, to be quite honest, because they were excluded from anything that had to do with. So somehow he found value in worshiping this God who made sure you knew you can't get close to me. That's kind of a challenge. And one of the neat things we'll see in a minute, where he's reading, Isaiah offers a brand new promise to this special class. So keep that in mind. What are you reading? Yes. But remember what the Lord's trying to do. He's trying to get his church to open their doors and accept at a level that has never been allowed before. So they've got Jews, they've got Samaritans, they've got a God-fearing eunuch now, and eventually they're going to get to the unthinkable. Oh my goodness, they're going to include Gentiles. That's what's going on. This is the push. They finally taken the step out of their comfort zone, out of Jerusalem and Judea, and now the church is beginning to spread like its outline, its charge was put forth. And by the time you get to Paul, boy, the Spirit sending Paul to all kind of crazy places. Yes, sir? Oh, I bet. I have no doubt. No, and that chariot probably walked most of the way. Hurts. That's pretty devoted. He is very devout. There's no question about it. Oh yeah, just like the Samaritan woman at the well. Oh my goodness, you couldn't stop her. She just went. Oh, thank you. That's even better. Thank you, Ray. I needed that. I'm going to try and remember that from now on. Oh, did you say something? Oh no.
It says he was the treasurer under Kandake and Manator, who was Kandake is a generic, just like Pharaoh.
Okay.
Okay, but a Manator, she reigned in the early part of the first century, okay? And her capital was in Meroe, which is in Sudan, 125 miles northeast of Khartoum, the capital. That's not in Ethiopia, okay? But he said, Queen of the Ethiopians. That's what the Hellenists or the Greeks called Cush or Nubia.
Nubia,
She
that's
was
where I
the
keep
Nubian
getting.
queen. So there's no contradiction. Knowing she wasn't from what we know of as Ethiopia.
Today, yeah.
She was from Sudan, which she was an Ethiopian or Cushite.
Or Nubia. I keep going back to Nubia.
Nubia, so that's, yeah. Right, one of the Philistine 5 cities. Yeah, okay. Oh, I didn't know that. And they import quite a bit. I'm glad you have that information. Did I see hand? Steve, did you raise your hand? Okay. Got to be careful moving, okay? Okay, let's keep reading now. Let's see. Well, that would have him reading Hebrew. I wonder, because Philip's a Greek speaker. I can't. Yeah? If he's reading the Hebrew. If he's reading the Greek translation, the Septuagint. Well, yeah, but he's a royal official. He better be well schooled. He would have his master's, PhD, whatever degrees in their world. CPA, that's it. Wasted time, what? At some point, this class took a detour. Ben Hurts and dating. No, I won't. I give up on that. Nope. I did miss it, totally. I'm going to try and find it. Okay. We are in Acts chapter 8. I'm not listening to anything else. We're in Acts chapter 8. We're down to verse 27. It said he had charge of all her treasury, so he's educated, had come to Jerusalem to worship, so he's devout, he's diligent. He was returning, so he's on his return trip, trying to take the car back to Hertz. Ray, that's going to stick with me. Okay. Sitting in his chariot, he was reading Isaiah the prophet, and they normally read out loud. That was common in their day. The Spirit said to Philip, go near and overtake this chariot. Now, I love this, trying to envision this. He's sitting here reading the scroll. At what point does he look up and realize there's this guy running from out in the middle of nowhere to catch up to his chariot? You probably could see Philip coming for a ways. Go near and overtake this chariot. Philip ran to him, heard him reading the prophet Isaiah, and said, do you understand what you're reading? It's a fitting question for the passage that he's reading. He said, how can I unless someone guides me? And he asked Philip to come up and sit with him. The place in the scripture which he read was this. He was led as a sheep to the slaughter, as a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opened not his mouth. In his humiliation, his justice was taken away. And who will declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. Now, if that's all, even if that's all you read, there's remarkable claims there. And it ends with the person is basically what? If they're taken from the earth, they're what? They're dead. So that would make you say, okay, this individual, why did you tell his story? If he's dead, how did he accomplish any of these great things? Well, if he'd kept reading, it would have gotten even murkier. But this is far enough because Philip, this is a perfect place for Philip to step in and be able to, for the first time in 700 years, fill in those blanks. Because Philip's got the answers to a 700-year-old mystery. And so he steps in, and again, I mentioned, notice the different ways that they introduce what they preached. I'm going to jump down and look at the end of verse 35. Beginning at this scripture, what did Philip preach? He preached Jesus to him. That's what it says, literally. Preach Jesus to him. So you've got preach the word, preach the gospel. You've got preach Jesus. That's actually used at the beginning of the chapter as well. Okay, the eunuch answered Philip and said, I ask of you, of whom does the prophet say this? Of himself or of some other man? That's the question. Philip opened his mouth, beginning at this scripture, preached Jesus to him. As they went down the road, they came to some water. And the eunuch said, see, here is water. What hinders me from being baptized? Stop before we go any further. Just out of curiosity. Go back over the story and tell me how many things had to come together at just the right moment to reach this point. Think of the odds. If we only believed in coincidence or luck, what all had to happen at the exact right moment to get the eunuch to this point? Steve?
He had to meet the eunuch in the chariot far enough away from the water to have enough time to teach him. The chariot had to go at a certain speed so that the time matched the place where they would land where the water is, because there's not much water.
Yeah, that's a very arid place.
Okay. It had to be during a season where there would be water there, because if there was a drought,
Hadn't thought about that one. Yeah.
there could have been a drought in a particular year where that water was all dried up. It had to occur at a particular time when the eunuch actually looked up and saw that there was water.
Okay.
He's been looking down at scripture,
Mm-hmm.
like we look at our phones and at a wreck or something.
Or step out in front of cars. Yeah.
First thing was, and well, he still could have been looking down in this water.
Yeah. And the very passage he was reading is just ideal for this whole event. I mean, it was the perfect question to stimulate the perfect question from him. Who's this person speaking about? Just happens to ask the exact question that Philip is anxious to answer. That's who he wanted to preach Jesus to him. And he says, Who is this guy? Let me tell you about him. I mean, the coincidences here. And of course, I'm using that sarcastically. The Spirit, the holy day, that's true. That's true. All of these had to come together at just the right instant. And the man had to have a heart that was, because there were other worshipers returning from Jerusalem that may not have been that open. But here's a foreigner and a eunuch kept at a distance. And yet his heart is open and he truly is listening to the Word of God, trying to get a grasp on it. Everything has to dovetail just perfectly, and it comes together at just the right moment. I said it was in quotations. Yes, I don't believe in coincidences here. He orchestrated all of it. If we didn't know from any other reason, it's because the angel of the Lord got it all started. He said, you need to go there. He already had everything in play. It was already ready. But that's why I said that. To attribute this to, well, wasn't that a neat coincidence? Not. The Spirit is at work just all the way through this. Yes, sir.
Well, just the intersection. He's been up in Samaria, and now he's in southeastern Judea.
Yeah. And we're not told how he got there, from there to there. Now, we're told what happens next, but that's what I mean. Exact timing, exact place. He was traveling somehow. That's true. But normally it's mentioned. Normally it's mentioned. That's true, right?
To me, it's kind of strange that you would think, like if I was going to believe somebody, there would be an obvious authority of who's telling me. And that's another one of those things. Here's a stranger.
Yes. That you don't even know where he came from because he just caught up to you out in the middle of nowhere. Normally, it's a great question. Yeah, slightly offensive. That's good. I can see that one. If he'd been dressed as a rabbi, you'd expect him to ask a question. My son, do you, yeah. That's good. I need that question too. Okay, back in 36, he says, what hinders me from being baptized? Now, every translation I know of right now makes the note that verse 37 is not in the oldest Greek texts. And it probably isn't. I know we've used it many times in the past. The Old King James, I assume the modern editions of the Old King James even have that note in there. But it's not in Textus Receptus, none of the ancient Greek manuscripts. It's not even in the text. It's in the text with a footnote.
It goes from 36 to 38.
Yes. So I wanted to address that. However, but I bet down in your footnotes it'll have 37 written out. Normally they at least include it to the side. So I wanted to explain why that's put off to the side like that. The manuscript evidence really doesn't seem to support it, although there are a lot of later copies that have the verse. The oldest and apparently most reliable do not. So be that as it will, that's why your text does what it does. I'm going to just jump down to verse 38. It says, he commanded the chariot to stand still. Both Philip and the eunuch went over, and Philip poured water on his head. Oh, wait, that's not what it said. Both Philip and the eunuch went down into the water. Why would you do that if you only have to sprinkle? Yeah. They went down into the water, and he baptized him. Literally immersed. That's what the word always meant in their world in the first century. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught Philip away. So at least his trip home was not as arduous as the trip down. If he ran all the way down, Tommy, he got rest on the way home. Actually, it goes beyond home, but yes, they did. So these arguments about baptism, it's okay to sprinkle, it's okay to pour. No, it's not. The text just does not support that in any sense or fashion. That was only added to the text centuries after it was written. Everything from the context, from the descriptions, from the original meaning of the word itself, it is always immersion. It's only man's creative ideas that muddy the water. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught Philip away so that the eunuch saw him no more. Now, you want to talk about, no, Sherry, your daughter's name. Drat! I was drawing a total senior moment right there. I'm sorry, Lisa. You want to talk about amazed. Now, you see this guy coming up out of nowhere who asked you that very presumptuous question. You notice he's not that amazed that suddenly Philip disappears? There's nothing in the text. It says, he saw him no more. You're in the middle of the desert. Where did he go? Don't know. And you don't even see this guy puzzling over it. He just goes on his way rejoicing. And I agree. He went home and he told everybody he could lay his hands on. I can see it no other way.
It's all the other conversions in this book. The rejoicing happens after the baptism, not before.
The baptism, that's good.
Forgiveness happens. It's where the moment, I like that, moment of salvation. Okay, now I want you to flip over to Isaiah 56 just for a moment. I had not remembered this until today. I hadn't studied this in a long time. But I wonder, when Philip is teaching the eunuch, I wonder, since he was in Isaiah already, did he go and take him through other parts of Isaiah that talked about the joy and the wonderful nature of the kingdom that was coming? I can't help but think, you know, you're already in Isaiah. If we're right, Doug, and he bought the scroll of Isaiah while he's in Jerusalem, stay in Isaiah. You can preach it all right there. I really believe surely he included this passage. Isaiah 56, starting in verse 3. Do not let the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord, now that's a God-fearer, eunuch is a God-fearer, if he's a Jew. Do not let the son of the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord, saying, the Lord has utterly separated me from his people. Nor let the what? Eunuch say, here I am, a dry tree. For thus says the Lord to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbath, and choose what pleases me, and hold fast my covenant. Even to them I will give in my house, and within my walls, a place and a name better than that of sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off. Their lineage, in some sense, would continue. And eunuchs can't reproduce. So this is a promise that to this point in the Old Testament, all the way to this point, the eunuch just doesn't have a lot of amazing promises to look forward to. But here, Isaiah, by inspiration of the Spirit, is talking about, hey, even those that have been kept at a distance, they're going to be welcomed. A place within my house, within my walls, a place and a name, and a lineage that won't be cut off. I can't help but wonder, okay, Philip, while you were there, did you happen to take him over here and say, by the way, this is really great news, even for folks in your situation? I don't know that he did that, but I can't help but think Isaiah was the perfect place for this study with this individual to answer these questions. Everything came together just the way the Spirit orchestrated it, so that when he was ready, the opportunity was right there at the side of the road. I'm back in Acts chapter 8. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord caught Philip away, so that the eunuch saw him no more, and he went on his way rejoicing. But Philip was found at Azotus, which, as you pointed out, is Ashdod, and passing on through there, he preached in all the cities till he came to Caesarea. Caesarea will be an important stop for Paul during his missionary work. And that's the next time we'll catch up with Philip. So Luke has taken Philip. He introduced him just for a moment at the beginning of chapter 6. He focused on Stephen. Now chapter 8 has been all about Philip and God's work through him. And he fades off of center stage, even though he'll come back as a small part of the story in Acts 21. But if Acts chapter 8 is any example of Philip's character and his faith, what do you think Philip's going to be doing between now and Acts 21? Preaching, preaching, more preaching. Now, when he gets to Caesarea here, he seems to settle there because we do find him, as I say, 12 chapters into the future, and he's still there, and he actually has a family at that time. So he steps off the stage, but we're going to assume he continues a life of doing just what he's been doing, and that's preaching Jesus every chance he gets to everyone who will listen. I love Philip's story. And I love watching how God can just bring all of this together, everything happening just when it had to happen, so that everything comes to pass just the way he wants it. Comments, questions, Ray?
Get on your air map.
Oh, good.
I'm wondering, as we enter chapter 9, where he's asking for a letter to bring the Christians from Damascus. I always
Yep.
thought Damascus would be outside.
From the synagogues in Damascus, it's actually air map. If Jerusalem's here, Damascus is, I think it's 120 miles north, kind of northeast. Damascus, it's across the Jordan, isn't it? Just making sure before I say that. Okay, so it's across the Jordan, which means, yeah, it's out of the promised land proper. But it's the synagogues in Jerusalem. And remember, this whole area ultimately is over whose rule? I mean, this whole part of the world is over whose rule? Rome. The Romans, while they kept things in check, they allowed the Jewish authorities, the Sanhedrin, to handle Jewish matters. So if you're going to the synagogues, that's the gathering places of the Jews, regardless of whether it's in the proper or outside of the proper promised land proper, the Romans would have turned a blind eye. They would have given authority to that. Now you're getting ahead and you're burning the thunder for next week, but
Been curious
good.
that authority, and I saw it the first time I read it, and
It does.
think it's outside
Yeah, but it doesn't say anybody he found in the cities necessarily. But he said to the synagogues. So they had to cooperate. The synagogues had to cooperate with the Sanhedrin, and the Romans allowed the Sanhedrin authority to deal with Jewish matters. So, yeah, this was well within their purview. And so Saul's not breaking any Roman law, the law of the land, but yes, he is going beyond the boundaries, technically. So that's a good question. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Just to get an idea of the size of the country we're talking about. Ashdod's on the coast.
Mhm.
If you go due east, you go through Jerusalem to the Jordan River, it's only 55.5 miles. That's the same distance from this building to Cleveland State Park and back. It's a small country.
It's a small country, and it's only 200 and something miles north to south, isn't it? The promised land originally. I'm not, by this point, Judea and,
A lot less.
yeah, a lot less.
If you're flying commercial from east to west, you pass it in 5 minutes.
Unless you're flying in, commercial, yes. If you're flying in one of my planes, it's going to take 30 minutes. Just, yeah, no. My planes are a little slower than that. Okay.
Well, I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully everybody had a good, fun Memorial Day weekend. Hopefully everybody enjoyed their day off on Monday. For my retired people, I hope you just enjoy your day off every day. I'm looking at you, Doug. I saw that shrug. But hopefully everybody's having a good time. So I guess it wasn't last week. Last week was Warren. 2 weeks ago, last time I talked, we talked about driving, right? And, I asked a serious question. And I wanted to continue this theme of driving and with another scenario. Not going to ask you if you're speeding or doing any of that stuff again. But like last time, I am going to start with a question. And my relatives, family members, people who know each other really well, you feel free to rat on your person. Spouses, children, parents, rat on your person. Don't feel bad about it. Who in here would consider themselves a backseat driver? I got Leah raising her hand. It's Leah, okay. So we've got two. Are there only two? Okay, three. Okay, good. I'm starting to get. Yeah, only three honest people in here. I need some relatives to raise some other people's hands. Huh? Depends on who's driving. Yeah, if it's, maybe a child, you might be more of a backseat driver than if it was, your parent. Yeah. Just have a bunch of pointing fingers going on back there. But, if you guys are struggling to decide if you are a backseat driver or not, I went to Google and I got these fancy little definitions for you, just to help you out. So Google says a backseat driver is a passenger in a car who gives the driver unwanted advice, or a passenger who is eager to advise without responsibility. So, right, we all know what that backseat driver is. They're sitting in, they can sit in the shotgun seat, right? They can sit in the shotgun seat or back seat, and you're driving along, and they just cannot stop telling you how you should drive your vehicle. You're going 2 miles over the speed limit. Gotta back it on up here. You took that turn too fast, right? You didn't completely stop at that stop sign, right? We've probably all had that happen to us before. But the scenario that I was kind of thinking of that really got me thinking in this area were my grandparents. On my mom's side, my grandparents, very bad backseat drivers. I never actually really had to deal with them as backseat drivers to me. I tried to kind of avoid that situation because I knew they were backseat drivers. But my two older cousins, I was sitting in the back seat most days, and my cousins Daniel and Lacey, they were probably I think Daniel's about 5 years older than me. Lacey was about 3. So they were getting their driver's license before I got mine. And I would sit in the back seat with grandparents while they were driving, and I would hear it constantly. And my grandma was one of probably the worst at the backseat driving. And she would do it in the grandmotherly way, right? Now, dear, you're going a little bit too fast. You got a little bit too close to the car. Super sweet, super loving, but very constant and very backseat driving, right? I love her dearly, but she still loves to backseat drive. But when I was going through this and thinking about backseat driving, kind of started making me think of backseat driving during the olden times. And I'm gonna say this. You guys know that backseat driving has been around a lot longer than automobiles. And if you need proof, let's go back to Roman times. Let's go back to the Gospels, because there are a group of men that I think were phenomenal, fantastic backseat drivers. The apostles. Right? We read through the gospel, we read through the Bible, and if you guys have watched or are watching The Chosen, I think they portray it really, really well. And we have these situations where Jesus is telling his disciples, hey, this is going to happen, or hey, we're going to go do this, or hey, this is what is going to happen. And they're like, Jesus, that's a great idea, that's a great plan, that's something that we really appreciate, but instead, let's just do this. Instead, let's do it our way. Instead, let's do it this way. And, Jesus has to correct the apostles many, many times throughout the gospel. And one of my favorite examples comes into Luke chapter 9. So if you guys want to turn over there, that's where we'll be tonight. But in Luke chapter 9, it's kind of a long passage, but I want to read all of it because it just kind of builds upon each other. Of Jesus, saying or doing something, and the apostles completely just ignoring what Jesus says and does their own little thing, and it builds, and I love the ending of this. So starting in verse 44, it says this: "Listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men." But they did not understand what this meant. It was hidden from them, so that they did not grasp it, and they were afraid to ask him about it. So Jesus is talking, right? And he tells them, hey, this is going to come. This is going to happen. The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, right? Talking about his death on the cross. And I love where the apostles go after this. I can only imagine how their minds worked and how their minds got onto this, because starting in verse 6, it then says, "An argument started among the disciples as to which of them would be the greatest. Jesus, knowing their thoughts, took a little child and had him stand beside him. Then he said to them, 'Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. For it is the one who is least among you all who is the greatest.'" Right? So they go through this argument. They go through this weird turn of events where the apostles are arguing among themselves, like, which one of us are going to be the greatest? That's obviously the important thing in this moment. And Jesus has to come in. He has to correct them. Haven't you guys been listening to me, right? Because the disciples have been with Jesus quite a while. This is getting towards the end of his time on earth. So the disciples have listened to the Sermon on the Mount, right? That's the perfect one that I can get at. Haven't you listened to me, right? That the least among you will be greatest. But they're going to still argue about this, so Jesus has to come in and correct them. And then it's going into verse 9. Like I said, it continues on. "Master," said John, "we saw someone driving out demons in your name, and we tried to stop him because he is not one of us." "Do not stop him," Jesus said, "for whoever is not against you is for you." Again, the disciples kind of taking it into their own hands of like, we're gonna do this for Jesus. This is needed, right? And then I love in verse 51, I think this is one of my favorite apostle moments. Starting in verse 51, it says this: "As the time approached for him to be taken up to heaven, Jesus resolutely set out for Jerusalem. And he sent messengers on ahead, who went into a Samaritan village to get things ready for him. But the people there did not welcome him, because he was heading for Jerusalem. When the disciples James and John saw this, they asked, 'Lord, do you want us to call fire down from the heavens to destroy them?' But Jesus turned and rebuked them. Then he and the disciples went to another village." I love this story, because like I said, this is not early on in Jesus' ministry. This is very late. The disciples have learned from Jesus. They've heard him say, "Love one another, love your neighbor, love your enemy." They've heard all these words. And yet James and John still come to Jesus. I can only imagine the exasperation on Jesus' face when they come to him and they're like, "Do you want us to burn down this village in your name? They didn't appreciate you, so this is what you've been teaching this whole time, right?" No. Right? That's not what Jesus taught. That's not how Jesus wanted things to go. The apostles did this throughout the entire gospel. They tried to backseat drive Jesus. And I feel like we are oftentimes like the apostles. I'm sure we've all heard the popular phrase, "Let Jesus take the wheel," right? It's basically saying, let Jesus control your life. Let Jesus steer the vehicle that is your life. But how many of us let Jesus take the wheel, but once he is there, we backseat drive? How many of us let Jesus take the wheel? Jesus starts making this turn, and we're like, "Whoa, slow down, Jesus. We need to be going that way. We don't need to be taking that turn." I feel like we all probably have struggled with this at some point in our lives. I feel like we probably struggle with this now, right? Because it's hard and kind of scary to give up control of our lives. It's something that I struggle with constantly. I pray about it. I ask Jesus, take control of my life. Do your will. Let your will be done, right? But then when Jesus wants his will to be done, I've got issues with it. And I try to back away. So what's the point of letting Jesus into the driver's seat if we're not going to let him drive? There's none. It doesn't work that way. I promise you guys, if you haven't learned this now, you will learn it. I'm sure looking at age groups, sorry. Everybody has probably learned this now. But Jesus is a far better driver than any of us. Right? Jesus is so much superior, because I'm sure we've all experienced these moments, those times that when we've let Jesus drive, those times are the times we've reached our destination in one piece. But those times when we've driven, vehicle looks a little rough. We have to give the keys back to Jesus. So stop backseat driving. Let Jesus take the wheel. Let Jesus control the destination of our lives. Give up control. Even though it's hard, it's something we are called to do. Because God and Jesus know that's what's best for our lives. And if you haven't, why not make Jesus the permanent driver in our lives? If this is something you need to do tonight, won't you come as we stand and sing?
I heard an old story, how Savior came from glory, how he gave his life on Calvary to save a wretch like me. I heard how his groaning, how his precious blood's atoning. Then I repented of my sins and won the victory. Oh, victory in Jesus, my Savior forever. He sought me and bought me with his redeeming blood. He loved me ere I knew him, and all my love is to him. He plunged me to victory beneath the cleansing flood.
Jake, I know the overhead was... That last point you made about when you don't let him drive, but you take the wheel and your vehicle looks pretty beat up. You had the perfect... Sorry, couldn't resist that, brother. Okay, thanks. I appreciate it. Okay, on the announcements. First off, because we didn't get it on here, next week's VBS. I know you're surprised, but next week's VBS. So I hope you're going to be here, be a part of it. Sunday after service, we'll be decorating until the cows come home. I hope you can be a part of that. But with VBS, that means there will be no Wednesday adult class next week. Just making sure everybody's on the same page. Every year it seems like somebody will ask me, next Wednesday, are we having class tonight? No, we got VBS tonight. So get that out front. Okay, just one thing is bottled water. Did we do okay on the wet wipes? Yeah, okay. Bottled water. Okay. Okay, good. Also, this Saturday is a memorial service for Toretta Walker here at the building at 11 a.m. We'll be feeding the church, feeding the family afterwards. And I didn't think a thing in the world about it. If anybody has a few minutes to help us set up tables, we need to set up about 50 chairs for the family. It would be easier to do it when there's a few of us here to help. Thanks, Dennis. I appreciate it. Well, I thought we'd do it tonight so we didn't have to do it on Saturday. Yeah, if we can do it tonight, that part will be out of the way. So I think that would be helpful. VBS starts next week. I believe the hours are the same as last year, 6:30 to 8:30. I think that's right. Okay, good. I got a nod, so we'll go with that. And then on June 11th, during morning class time, adult classes will be dismissed because we'll be having a breakfast wedding shower. Is this a thing, Carol, or is this the only time we could work it in? Okay, for Caleb and Callie, you know, Caleb grew up in this congregation. We knew him before he wasn't here. And they're engaged, and so the only time they can be here is that weekend. That Sunday morning, June 11th, Caleb is actually going to be bringing the sermon as well. So it'll be a really neat day. That's the end of VBS. So that'll be at 9 to 9:45. We'll have a money gift card tree for them, and they're also registered at Amazon. If you've looked at their registry for Caleb and Callie, it's wonderfully down to earth. I love registries that don't have $500 toaster ovens, you know, and stuff. No, theirs are really cool. You ought to go just look. I love those two. So I hope you'll come be a part of that. Camp applications, when's the deadline on that? Oh, okay, but the early bird.
Early bird special's done.
Okay, that's done. Okay, good. That's what I needed to know. And again, if you can help sponsor, I'm sure that would be appreciated as well. Okay, that's all the announcements I've got. And then I've got our prayer list. Bambi Burnett is home recovering from Achilles tendon surgery. Perry talks like she's doing really well. I haven't talked to her. I've texted with her, but I didn't want to disturb her. But she sounds like she's doing pretty well, and pain's not too bad. Sherry Martin's got great news. Surgery has been postponed because the PT and the new meds making a real difference. So that's a good news. Hopefully it'll be permanently postponed. How's that? We can do that. Karen Johnson will find out more soon about her cancer treatment that she's facing. Tom had skin cancer spot removed from the nose today, right? And that's why he's not here tonight. Oh, he's not? From his text, he sounded like he was cutting up, but oh, okay. Let's keep him in prayer, which means keep Monica in prayer too. We found out yesterday that Helen Rhodes is still in a lot of pain from the car accident, and so keep her in your prayers. Lorinda Reynolds, you probably remember Lori and Sarah. She drove a bus. She still drives a bus, but I don't. Anyway, they're having a lot of health issues, both she and her daughter. She's having knee replacement surgery Friday, as well as several other health issues going on. Chrissy Kalk is home, but still recovering from pneumonia. Jamie Johnson family, anything new on them from the car accident?
He is still at the hospital. She's at another rehab. She's at rehab. Both parents are rehab. Christy's still heavily sedated. Her lungs are giving her some difficulty.
Okay, so keep them in our prayers. Aubrey Sims Sr. still hospitalized with kidney failure. Greg Biddison has a mass in his lungs. Vicki Garrett, that's Megan Odian, my daughter-in-law's mother, been diagnosed with breast cancer. Robert Vick, Barbara's not here tonight, but he's out of the hospital but got a pacemaker. Family of Justin Duffy, that's the Throckmorton's friend, at his recent death, leaving a wife and 3 young children behind. Keep the Maxwells in your prayer because of the death of their son-in-law. They're still working on, he said there was probate. I texted with him yesterday, and some other issues going on. Madison Odian, her surgery is still scheduled for next Tuesday on her ear canal, reconstructing her ear canal and eardrum. And the John's supposed to finish his radiation mid-June, and wants prayers for improved energy level. Anything new on your dad, Jennifer?
He's going to have it done on June 5th. So next week.
And what we're waiting on.
June 6th. June 6th.
Same day as Madison.
And
mom's sister, and she's the one that had a heart attack and then found out that she had several heart attacks and didn't know it. She's still at the heart center at Medical City, yeah, in Dallas, in ICU. But she's awake now because they have her sedated. She's awake now, sitting up, and they're waiting for her to get stronger. They're either going to put a mechanical heart in her or another, a better pump.
Okay.
I don't know when they put in her why that wasn't the better pump, but the doctor, there's a team of doctors that are constantly reviewing everything, so they're the best in the area. Yeah, you can continue praying for her. And my cousin, that's, that's her only daughter.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we need to keep both of them in our prayers. Anybody else? Okay, Russ, how about dismissing us tonight? Let's stand and pray.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for tonight, bringing us together to talk about your word, what's happened in the first century, and some of those words that still apply to us. Father, thank you for the family here, or many here that love each other. There are some who are gone, cannot be with us tonight. Relatives, friends, who are ill, we ask that you comfort them, heal them where it's your will. Be with us tonight as we go from here, that we can hold each other's wishes and desires in our heart for each other, to encourage one another until we see each other again.